This is the
Five Stars
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, it's been an interesting couple days. Not much of it's taken place in the realm of professional wrestling. That's just more so on my personal end. Not to say it's been a quiet news week in wrestling either. AEW still got their series of ongoing issues, up to and including the boss having no clue or concept of how to conduct interviews. That Ariel Helwani story has got to be one of the most eye-opening news bulletins of the entire week. And keep in mind, that is on top of Hangman Page getting concussed in the middle of a match on live television. That company, man, they just can't catch a break. All the time with AEW, it's like one step forward, three steps back. You know, just when you think things are looking up for them, there's always something that goes horribly awry. Sometimes you just can't help but laugh, especially when they do it to themselves. Oh yeah, and completely unrelated news, Ace Steel's been fired. Just figured I'd mention that since it's on the topic of AEW. Not that I really care all that much. I mean, I think the writing's kind of on the wall with where CM Punk's future lies with that company. Quite frankly, I don't blame him if he doesn't want to come back. Doesn't look all that good, but, of course, when we get the opportunities for Tony to sort of elaborate on what's going on with that whole situation, of course he's going to give it the corporate spin and refuse to answer any of the questions pertaining to pretty much anything of substance with that company. But we're not here to talk about AEW this weekend. We are here to talk about the other piece of train wreck television. Actually, SmackDown wasn't too bad. It totally fell off a cliff by the time we got to the second hour, but I don't know. The first half hour of the show was pretty good. Retro Raw, well, we'll get to it. Before we do, though, make sure you subscribe, comment, and like the show. If it is your first time checking out the 5 Starr Wrestling Report, we are on YouTube and Rumble every Monday and Friday for new content. For this particular episode, we've got our normal Retro Raw and SmackDown reports to go over. And for this coming Friday, we will be doing the AEW Dynamite recap and the other extension of our classic retro review series material. On top of the big shows that we got coming up soon, WWE's got a Saudi Arabia show in a couple weeks. Not too soon after that, AEW Full Gear, where hopefully they'll actually bother to announce more than 3% of the card by the time we get to the go-home show. And, before you know it, WWE will be running the annual Survivor Series event. Can't believe we're almost in November already. That's insane. Now, the real question is when we get to that Survivor Series event, will it be another brand versus brand ordeal? Lord only knows. Apparently, they've been rumored to book some kind of War Games dealia bob at some point. I don't know if that'll factor into the theme of the Survivor Series show or if it'll be its own separate pay-per-view. Normally, I thought they equated the War Games deal to NXT, but whatever. I always like the idea of them running the Elimination Chamber at Survivor Series every year. Then they made it its own special gimmick show, and it became less special by comparison. We should go back to that old formula, because I always liked the Chamber match. Anyhow, that'll all be stories for later dates. For now, we've got a Retro Raw episode to cover. So let's get into that, Jonathan. Well then, that was rather uneventful. One might say boring, but I don't want to give it the impression that it was a bad show or anything. It was just kind of a case in point of one of those shows where they had multiple squash matches and not a whole lot in terms of story development. They touched on the main event angle from last week with Crush and Savage, which bled into the first segment here. But aside from that, there really wasn't a whole lot going on this week with Retro Raw. So we'll probably end up chugging right through this review in relatively short order. So after covering the Crush Savage Summit, as opposed to the Savage Crush Summit, which Bobby Heenan did not take too kindly to, we had our first squash featuring Crush under his new role with Master Fuji as a heel. And he's got the new ring gear and face paint to go along with the look, kind of resembling the old face colors when he was part of Demolition. And now that he's taking on this new heel role, it is time for Crush to break out some new moves, including the back spinning roundhouse kick. Eric Bischoff would be so proud of that. Aside from Crush working over the job guy and going over with a modified vice grip, Heenan spent most of the match making fun of Randy Savage's lacerated tongue, which he suffered after being dropped across the ring barricade last week. And that was pretty much all to the segment. If I told you the fans were almost dead quiet for 99% of everything that happened here, that is probably still giving it too much credit. We then had a 30-second pre-tape where Johnny Polo took some jabs at Marty Jannetty and the 1-2-3 Kid, saying that he could beat them both with one hand tied behind his back. At that point, they may as well have just put up a graphic that read, "Run-in alert," because they weren't even trying to mask that Polo was somehow going to get involved in their scheduled match. And, well, we go right into it. Marty Jannetty and the 1-2-3 Kid, babyface versus babyface, which definitely felt like an odd booking decision, especially for the WWF around this point. Vince was not the kind of guy that liked to go to the well with two babyfaces wrestling each other, unless there was real story implication for it. But here on this random episode of Raw, second on the card, they do Jannetty versus the 1-2-3 Kid. And because of the deal they shot with Johnny Polo literally minutes prior, most of the match I was just sitting on my hands waiting for him to get involved. And he ended up being the focal point of the story of the match. Easily the best bit of commentary during this match from Bobby and Vince. Heenan makes a comment at one point noting that Marty has a nice set of hair, and then he goes on to say that he looks like Julia Roberts, to which Vince retorts with, and I am not making this up, he goes, "Well, at least he's not pregnant." And I think Bobby Heenan was genuinely stunned by that comment, because there is about a 5-second pause, and Heenan responds under his breath, "That's right. And I think she's due in April, too." And of course, Vince goes, "Who, Jannetty?" Oh, Vince. I have no idea what the hell was going on with him during this match, but Vince was totally out to lunch from a mental capacity here. But getting back to the Johnny Polo thing, he ends up coming out right before the first commercial break. And when they come back from break, one of the first spots here sees the Kid Irish whip Jannetty off the ropes, and as Jannetty is running toward the other side, Polo reaches in and trips him up behind Waltman and the ref's back. So Waltman immediately capitalizes on it, not knowing that Polo just interfered on his behalf. And at some point, Jannetty ends up taking over on Waltman, and they do the same deal where he whips Waltman into the ropes, and of course Polo reaches in and trips up Waltman this time. It was an interesting idea in theory. You know, it explained why they booked two babyfaces to wrestle each other completely at random for no reason. I think the problem here is that they tried to stretch this match out for way too long. Like, it almost made the angles where Polo got involved kind of pointless, because he ends up tripping up both guys during the match. but it never really leads to anything. They just keep doing spots like nothing happened. They weren't going after Polo on the floor. The ref's just kind of standing there not doing anything, even though it's totally obvious that Polo was getting involved. I just wonder how better off the match would have been if they would have just let Jannetty and Kid have a competitive back-and-forth babyface match. Because they were hitting each other with a lot of stuff here, and the crowd was getting into several of the near falls as the match went along. But as soon as Polo became the central focus again, it kind of killed all the momentum. It's almost like they were kind of trying to shoehorn in an angle here just for the sake of doing one when they'd have been better off just letting the guys go out there and have a cold match to pop the crowd. But they ended up getting to the spot where they inadvertently bumped the ref. Jannetty ends up getting dumped out to the floor. And in one of the scariest yet hilarious bumps I think I've ever seen, Waltman goes to do a suicide dive out to the floor. But it's not like the standard tope dive where he runs at the guy and then uses his arms to reach out to knock the guy into the barricade. Waltman basically took a senton flip bump onto the mat and completely ate shit. All because Johnny Polo shoved Jannetty aside so that Waltman would crash and burn. The visual of it looked hilarious because when they cut to the shot on the floor, all you see is Waltman fly into the frame for like a split second and completely pancake himself on the mat. At least I thought it was funny. And of course, with both guys out on the floor, the ref ends up counting them both out. But the ending was satisfying because when Polo goes to walk up the ramp and he's applauding himself for a job well done, the babyfaces end up chasing after him and throw him back into the ring so they can double team him. And that ultimately got a big pop from the crowd. So at least the heel got his comeuppance in the end. A very satisfying finish. It should be noted too, Johnny Polo was absolutely fantastic during this whole exchange, especially when he's bumping around and flopping like a fish. But I presume that sets up something with Jannetty and the 1-2-3 Kid going up against the Quebecers at some point. I have no recollection of it happening, but it'll probably be one of those TV feuds that they blow off in like a one-and-done thing and then move on. But looking back at the show, it was probably the most notable thing that they did on the entire card. Then we had another Double J promo outside the Buddy Lee Attractions building, aka the #1 talent agency in the world. And as we all know, Jarrett is on a mission in the world of wrestling. He's coming to the WWF for one reason and one reason only: to solidify himself as the single best country music singer in the world. Because the WWF was a platform for Double J to advance his goal of being the best country musician the world has ever seen. That was his gimmick. That is JEFFJARRETT, Jeff Jarrett. Still can't do that bit without the southern accent. But get ready for more of it, because there's plenty more to come. Slapnuts. Speaking of slapnuts, Ludwig Borga killed a job guy in relatively short order here. He also spent a good amount of the time jaw-jacking with someone off camera. At first I thought it was one of the ring announcers, but I'm pretty sure it was just a heckler in the front row. And the main takeaway from this was all to set up Borga's upcoming match with Tatanka. A match that apparently they didn't even air on Raw, but on WWF Superstars. I totally forgot about that. Tatanka's undefeated streak came to a close 1 week from this point in the year 1993, and they didn't even book it on their flagship television show. But Borga pretty much summed up everything you need to know about the whole match, and we will definitely talk about it in detail once we see the replay of it. But Borga promised to end Tatanka's career. And while I know he meant that in the figurative sense, I don't think it's all that unfair to say that it also ended up taking place in the literal sense. because from a historical standpoint, at the moment Tatanka's undefeated streak came to an end, so did his WWF career, for lack of better terms. Because I don't think that dude ever recovered after being jobbed out to Borga, especially in the manner it was done. That man was doomed from that point onward. But, again, we will talk about it more in detail once we get there, because there is plenty to say about it. Speaking of things that were doomed, pretty much from the start, Men on a Mission wrestled this week. They also rapped. It almost gives me that much more of an appreciation for the Acclaimed every time I see them. I guess the one positive thing I can say about it, and you almost forget about this, especially when you take into account a lot of the more agile big men we've seen in wrestling over the years. And I'm not even trying to demean the guy when I say this, but for anyone that has watched Mabel throughout his career, the guy was morbidly obese. Like, that guy pretty much pushed 5 bills for the majority of his career. Goddamn, that guy could still move. Like, he was never a Paul White or a Mark Henry or even a Bam Bam Bigelow in terms of the athletic stuff he could pull off. But he could still do some shit. He ended up breaking out a standing dropkick at one point in this match when him and Mo were doing double team spots. You know, to think that guy ended up wrestling well into the 2000s era of the WWF. I mean, that's almost unheard of if you actually think about it. You know, obviously the health complications kicked in during the latter stages of his life, and how long has he been gone now? God, it's been at least 7 or 8 years now, right? But the longevity that guy got out of his in-ring career looking like that, that's amazing. I mean, Vince obviously loved him, as we come to find out a couple years later when he won King of the Ring and they put the world title on him. And as stupid and tacky as the whole Men on a Mission thing was, Mabel was definitely the standout of that team. I just can't get over how well that guy could move for his weight. He was certainly in better in-ring condition than Bash and fucking Booger. That is for sure. So after this, we had a Survivor Series card update, which I think was just a recap of the matches they announced the previous week. And after that came our TV main event. And remember when I mentioned at the top of the report that this was a very uneventful program? Guess who main evented Monday Night Raw this week? Yes, the one and only Diesel. Big sexy Kevin Nash getting the main event slot here on Raw in the year 1993. And this was back when he was merely just a bodyguard for Shawn. Just wait until a couple of years later when they put the world title on him. All downhill from there. You know, Vince kind of hit the nail on the head here when he was talking about how you won't see a lot of finesse or, and this is a quote, scientific knowledge when it comes to Diesel's offense. To which I said, oh, just you wait until the WCW era. There's a reason Cornette's joke about the 5 moves of doom with Kevin Nash is an all-timer. 5 moves if you count the hair flip, of course. At least Nash hit a backbreaker across the knee at one point here. Anyway, Nash went over after giving the job guy a stiff right to the jaw. This is obviously before the jackknife powerbomb came into play, but that was apparently Kevin Nash's finish. Just punch a guy in the face, knock him out. Sure. I mean, he wasn't Ronnie Garvin, but I guess you could say it was believable. But yeah, that was their TV main event. Kevin Nash in the final match of the show. Boy, is that ever a precursor for just how bleak things would get a few years later. Can't wait to dive into that whole era. Anyhow, Probably the biggest news bulletin of the show was the announcement of the upcoming Ludwig Borga-Tatanka match. Once again, a match that was apparently so important, they didn't even bother booking it on Raw. Talk about a bad omen. Poor Tatanka. Dude never recovered from that loss. But that'll be a discussion for next week's show. For this one, really nothing to report on in terms of major news outside the follow-up to the Savage Crush story. The Survivor Series pay-per-view is obviously the priority in terms of build, so we'll be seeing more of the card shape up in the coming weeks. And for the record, too, we're also going to include that as part of the Retro Review series when we get to that date in November. But let's jump over to SmackDown in the meantime. Present-day SmackDown, not Retro SmackDown. We're about 70 years out from that still. We'll see if we even make it that far on this channel. For now, though, modern SmackDown will do. And we open this week with Sheamus and Solo Sikoa. Firstly being interrupted by a weird Bray Wyatt vignette, which the announcers completely ignored, as if we, the audience, were the only ones that were apparently supposed to see it. Wouldn't be the first time that's happened in the wacky world of pro wrestling, but, well, it's still goofy. It was funny hearing them bill Solo from Las Vegas, Nevada. I don't know why, but something about Solo being surrounded by a bunch of wild Samoans and then being announced from Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places. I find that humorous, even if it is his actual hometown. So obviously, if you watch last week's show, this is kind of a tie-over from the four-way main event. They did the deal at the end of the match where Sheamus had Solo in the cloverleaf, and then that's when shit kind of broke down with the Bloodline and the Brutes. And everyone started going after each other, and for lack of better terms, Solo and Sheamus just kind of disappeared from the match entirely. Never really learned what happened to them, other than I guess we were supposed to assume they fought to the back with everyone else. Maybe they went out for a smoke break while they were at it. In any case, they had everyone out at ringside for this match, and the stuff Sheamus and Solo did here was perfectly fine. Again, I say it every week, but it's true. Every time I see Solo in the ring, he gets better and better with each passing match. I still think it'd be in their best interest to stack on a few more TV wins for him against some underneath guys before they try to start booking Solo in these higher tier matches. You know, especially when you don't really want to beat either guy in the end of it. I'm all for Solo's matches ending in wishy-washy finishes from time to time, but generally I think they should keep on having him win a few more matches before throwing him into these kinds of situations. But both men worked hard here. You know, Solo kind of targeted Sheamus' shoulder for a while, ended up being the central focus of the match, actually. Sheamus made a good babyface comeback at the end, ended up catching Solo with a bro kick, and right as he was going for the pin, Sami Zayn got on the apron and took the ref. So, of course, that evidently led to the guys getting into a brawl at ringside. I guess I have to be fair in my critique of it because, you know, I always talk about how annoying it is when AEW has virtually every match end with guys or gals getting into ringside brawls before, during, and after matches. And, you know, we see this constantly with WWE too. It doesn't make it any less annoying. So I'll go ahead and call them to task for it because it's equally as frustrating. Again, though, you know, obviously they needed an outing to protect Sheamus here because he ended up taking the pinfall. They do a deal where Sheamus takes out the Usos with a diving clothesline out to the floor. And as he tries to get back in the ring, Sami grabs Sheamus' ankle so that Solo can take advantage, catches him with a thrust kick, and then hits him with the Uranagi finish to get the pin. And make no mistake, you know, that is a big win for Solo Sikoa, regardless of him needing interference to go over. And, you know, the deal afterwards where the heels targeted Sheamus' bad arm and then used the chair to injure him in the ring steps. I mean, it's effective heat. I'm usually a little iffy on guys having to use multiple chair shots when one chair shot should be enough to do the job. But, you know, Jay going into a rage mode and having to be calmed down by Sami, at least it's drawing attention to some story continuity there. So, I didn't really have a problem with this. I don't know what the end game is with the whole Bloodline Brutes feud, unless it's going to factor into the Survivor Series show somehow. I figured the big program would be Roman and Sheamus for the title, but maybe that's not the direction it'll end up going. I don't know. I mean, Roman's going to need some filler opponents between now and Rumble season. Sheamus isn't really someone I'm dying to see get a Universal title shot, but as a placeholder deal, it's not their worst option, I guess. So the next thing I jotted down here was his Bray Wyatt skit, and it wasn't even so much of a skit. It was a promo pre-tape where he kind of touched on where he left off last week before he got cut off. And, while it's on my mind, let me just get my major gripe out of the way because it was prevalent during this segment. Not a fan of this new Bray Wyatt theme. I didn't talk about it last week because there was so much material to cover with that whole promo. Like, the music didn't even cross my mind when we were covering everything. But, yeah, I'm not digging this new music. I don't think it fits. It's just off. Like, something about it is just off to me. Maybe that's the musician in me talking because I'm a drummer, but I don't know. Like, sometimes you'll listen to a guy's theme song and, like, from the minute you hear it, it's like, yeah, that shit works, or that fits the gimmick. I think it's that Code Orange group that Hunter was a big fan of during the classic NXT days. I don't listen to their music. I don't really have much of an opinion on the group one way or the other, but I remember, wasn't this the same group that kind of did the remix of the old Bray Wyatt theme when he was doing the Fiend gimmick? I remember that shit was lit. Like, that worked perfectly. This is just, I'm not buying the theme. That's really the only thing I can say about it. It doesn't really vibe with what Bray's going for right now. At least not with how it's being presented on television. Again, maybe I'm the only one that's thinking that, but, he's cutting this promo and I'm listening to his theme music play in the background the whole time, and I'm just thinking to myself, is this the best they could settle with for theme music? I don't know. Now, the promo itself was interesting. Again, it's one of those things where if you're skeptical of Bray's creative input, if you're prone to reject anything they book for Bray because of his checkered past, I understand why you might not like where this is going. Once again, though, I'm not going to crap on it until I'm given a reason to. As far as the material, he's observably still keeping us in the dark with a lot of things, but as part of an overarching story, I like where this left off. Because he's basically talking about his ongoing problems of dealing with anger and how the only thing he wanted to do for a long time was tell the people to go away and leave him alone. But all this time he's been thankful that they were willing to welcome back with open arms. And he basically concludes that he sees who you are, and from this point forward, he's going to do horrible things that he'll never feel sorry for. Okay. Not sure who you is specifically referring to, but it keeps a lot of open-ended questions running. Again, it's part of a layered story. Bray's material usually kind of follows a puzzle pattern where he'll introduce pieces from week to week, and we kind of wait to see how everything unfolds in the end. Most of the time, admittedly, it ends up sucking a witch's tit, but, we can judge that once we see how quickly it all goes off the rails. As long as no one's getting set on fire, I'll be on board with it. At least in the interim. By the way, if the U turns out to be Randy Orton, we might need to have a more stern conversation about that. On the topic of conversations we need to have, let's talk about how fucking awesome this Bloodline stuff is. This skit in the back with Sam and the Usos. Dude, where to begin with this? Well, I guess I can start with giving Sammy a hypothetical man hug for just being the greatest sleazy heel in the business today. This deal where he's firing up Solo and talking about how the Bloodline is unstoppable with Solo as the wrecking shop guy every week. He's the best. What else can I say? He is the best at this role. There is nobody else on this roster, male or female, that could pull off the slimy sleazeball gimmick that Sammy's working. And, the shit where Jey Uso's trying to pump up everyone to jump Logan Paul when he gets to the building, and Sammy's cutting him off at the pass saying, actually, Roman kind of mentioned not to get involved with the whole Logan thing. And the whole time he's going at him, Jay's just staring a hole through Sammy. Sammy's trying to get Jimmy's opinion on everything. And I haven't mentioned a lot about Jimmy Uso, but I love the fact that his entire role in this story is to just stand in the background and say one line and nothing else. He goes, "My dog." And of course, Sammy smiles and pats him on the back after the fact. And then when Jay kind of walks off and teases that he still wants to lay out Logan later on, they put the camera on Jimmy and Sammy, and Sammy goes, "Is he joking or is he serious? Because he sounded pretty serious." And then Jimmy Uso, with his hand covering his mouth, he's pondering it for a second. And then he just turns to Sammy and goes, "My dog." This is a fucking 5-star segment. Everybody in this story is perfectly cast. And I hate using the term cast because it makes it sound like everyone's playing an acting role, but the way everyone is positioned in this Bloodline thing from a character standpoint, you couldn't do any better if you tried. The whole Sammy thing being up in the air of whether or not he's going to turn on Roman in the end, I'm just on the edge of my seat waiting to see whether or not he ends up fucking over Roman at some point down the road. Because I could totally buy it from a character standpoint that is something Sami Zayn would do. So I can't wait to see how this all unfolds. And at that point, well, the show kind of went off the rails for all intents and purposes. We had a Liv Morgan-Sonya Deville match, which I gladly skipped over. I did catch the post-match angle where Liv had given Sonya a superplex onto a bunch of folding chairs. Apparently, they're still trying to do the whole Psycho Liv Morgan story where she's trying to be extreme. Because I guess she's lost her mind or something. I don't know. Maybe it's a fetish for some people, but the crazy chick syndrome is usually an instant turnoff for me. I like my women normal and sane. I know that's probably asking a whole lot in the year 2022, but here we are. And then we got this Brawny the Strowman Omos face-off. My God, this segment. Last week, I peed myself at the thought of seeing these two actually face off. Then upon actually seeing it, I ended up legitimately shitting myself. And not with a joyous reaction, but an, oh my God, they are actually going to go through with this reaction. Well, in any case, the match is happening at Crown Jewel. There's actually a part of me that sadistically wants to see how bad that's going to be, just out of pure curiosity. Like an incoming train wreck level of intrigue. Keep in mind, too, by the way, the deal with MVP and Strowman going back and forth on the mic, it was what it was. I never really thought Strowman was a good promo to begin with. He always sounded really wooden and overly scripted to me, and this wasn't much different. But when they had Omos come out and stand toe-to-toe with Strowman, Omos completely dwarfing Strowman by comparison, this is what I was afraid of. And I kind of figured it was only a matter of time before they totally shat the bed on Strowman's return. I just didn't think it would come this soon. Strowman's been back on TV for, what, like a month? How many squash matches has he had in that time frame? Much less programs or feuds. And they've already cast him into a predicament where the guy he's feuding with, not only can he not wrestle worth a shit, but now they have made Strowman just another guy on the roster. Instead of featuring him as an attraction who stands out among every other guy they got on the SmackDown brand, now they're having a Raw guy randomly show up on SmackDown to challenge Strowman to a match at Crown Jewel, completely negating any meaning or implication that Strowman would have had as a monster. Because someone woke up one day and decided they need to book a giant versus giant match when it made no sense to do it right now. And that is all it took for them to completely crap on Braun. He is now just another guy that is no different from everybody else. They took their Andre the Giant and put him in the ring with the modern-day Giant Gonzalez. It is entirely possible I'm the only one that's not on board with this. Aside from the obvious that the match is going to be balls and everybody knows it. But I just can't believe they thrust Strowman into a feud like this so soon, before he's even had a chance to make an impact of any kind. Look, I'm not a booker, obviously. Never spent a day in the business in my life. But let's just think about it for a second. Why did we need to do this match right now? You want to do something like this 6 months to a year into Braun's return? Once you've established him as a wrecking force who's steamrolled through the entire roster? Okay, we can have that kind of conversation. You can hype that up as a special attraction match sometime in, let's say, mid to late 2023. Okay, cool. But when Strowman has been back for less than 3 months and you are already booking him into a corner like this, I just think it's a bad call. If I was in that creative meeting and someone was asking me for my input on this, I'd be putting my foot down. I'd be saying, no, this is not the program that we should be booking right now. It's too early. Strowman is not established enough. I think we should hold off, put this on a bigger pay-per-view sometime next year when people would actually maybe pay money to see it, after we've kind of established Strowman as the monster badass. He's been back not even 5 months now. And they put him in the ring with Omos. They basically had Omos lay him out like a geek. I just don't think it did him any favors. But maybe I'm the only one. Maybe we should ask the expert's opinion on it. So then we had a deal in the back where Drew McIntyre announced a steel cage match with him and Karrion Kross for Crown Jewel. Kind of figured they were going in this direction eventually. Don't really have a problem with it. Again, it's not really something I'm pining to see at the moment, especially with how mid this entire Kross-McIntyre feud has been from the jump. But the cage stipulation is at least a little more fitting than a strap match. Personally, I think the parking lot brawl would have kind of made more sense, since that's where Kross got jumped a couple weeks back. But again, I'm not a booker. But since I skipped over the first women's match, I decided to try and give them the benefit of the doubt with this one. While I still don't understand the appeal of the Shotzi Blackheart thing, and I don't think I ever will, I like Raquel Hernandez Perez de Garcia III, or whatever name she's going by now. And I've never had a problem with Dakota or Io Sky, although I'm still not really on board with the whole damage control thing. So I watched the match. It was for the women's tag titles, which I guess are still a thing apparently. Weren't these belts exclusive to NXT at one point? How did they end up on the main roster? I don't know. Anyway, the match kind of existed. Most of Shotzi's stuff looked horrible, but that's not out of the ordinary. She did a wacky spot at one point where she jumped off Raquel's shoulders and barely made contact trying to come down on Dakota and Io. Looked like they all three damn near killed themselves. Probably because Io and Dakota didn't want to catch a 120-pound girl coming down on them from like 10 to 15 feet in the air. I don't blame them. There was a point early on where the announcers were talking about NXT's Halloween Havoc show, and they were trying to get me to go out of my way to watch clips of this super diva, Quincy Adams. A dude, by the way. Apparently, there is a male wrestler on NXT who is going by the moniker of being called the Super Diva. That sounds pretty woke. No thanks. I will let the suspense hang over on that one for quite a while. Anyway, Raquel ended up getting a hot tag at the end, threw around the heels for a minute or so. Easily the most impressive thing in the entire match was the spot where Io gave Raquel a tornado DDT off the top rope, and Raquel took a great bump on top of her head. That probably would have been a perfect finish, but unfortunately that wasn't the case. There was some awkward miscommunication at the end with all four girls. I think they were trying to do a spot where Dakota would inadvertently break up a pinfall from Shotzi, but whatever they were going for, it didn't come off well in execution. Ended up with Dakota and Raquel spilling out to the floor. And then after Bayley tried to get involved, Io picked up Shotzi, hit her with the air raid crash, and then pinned her with a moonsault. I've seen worse girls' matches. I mean, the worst of the bunch in this match was Shotzi, who's still as green as her hair color. The other three are at least moderately decent workers. Io obviously being the best of the bunch. Again, the whole damage control thing is not really clicking with me. I like the three girls in the group, but as a trio, I still have no idea why they're friends, what their purpose is, what damage they're trying to rectify or control, or why I should care. I don't know. I mean, unless Bayley ends up becoming the champion at some point, which they could still do, but until that happens, I'm sort of ambivalent about pretty much anything they do with this group from a story standpoint. We had another weird pre-tape with the guy in the Halloween mask that's been interacting with Bray recently. And aside from them throwing up another QR code that flashed by the screen pretty quickly, I'm almost positive that the word howdy was uttered here before they cut away. All right then. So now we can run down our roster of Southerners to figure out who is close friends with Bray. I can think of approximately 0 people at this point. Rey Mysterio had a match with Ludwig Kaiser, kind of tying in with an angle they shot earlier where Gunther's goons confronted Rey in the back and Rey basically challenged one of them to a fight. This is a good match. I always joke about how I never thought all that highly of Gunther's boys, and most notably because they've always just kind of been used as punching bags more often than not. Every time I've seen them used, they're either doing jobs or taking the bullet for Gunther. They're good athletes. You know, Kaiser had a strong showing here with Rey, but I always just kind of viewed them as lackeys, if anything else. Not really a whole lot to say about it. I love the spot on the floor where Rey went to toss the chair at Gunther, and when Gunther slapped the chair down, Rey took the phantom bump and started covering his head, and fans immediately start the classic Eddie chants because they knew exactly who Rey was paying homage to. That was a nice touch. And of course, the ref does the over-exaggerated, "You're out of here" ejection, and the people all blow a gasket for it. I thought they should have taken the match home right then and there, but they tried to drag it out for another couple minutes. But Rey ended up going over with the 619. If anything, this segment went to show how over Rey Mysterio is. In the year 2022, by the way. God, how old is Rey now? Gotta look that up real quick. Rey Mysterio. Let's see. He is 47 years old. Dude, he's wrestling like he's 27. God. That's amazing. I haven't seen these kinds of performances with Ray since the Nitro days. It's incredible. Anyway. Well, that wasn't the final thing on the show. We had one more thing to cover. This Logan Paul segment. Doing his damnedest to be a babyface and utterly failing at every turn possible. Even the cheap hometown plugs didn't pop the crowd. These people knew better. So, Logan talked. It was drier than a chaffed ass, colder than a witch's tit, flatter than a plate full of piss. Pretty much any analogy you want to use. It sucked. How about that? Thankfully, Jey Uso ran in and jumped Logan before he could bury himself 10 feet beneath the earth. And I don't know what the hell was going on with how they were editing this in the production truck, but I'm like 90% sure they were trying to pipe in canned booze, because when Jey attacked Logan here, I don't know what was going on with the audio, but it sounded very artificial. But didn't last long, because Sammy ended up running down to try to get Jey to leave the ring. And with all the stalling of Sammy trying to talk Jey down, when Jey tried to go after Logan in the corner again, Logan moved out of the way, decked Jey with a knockout blow, and pretty much laid him out. Vociferously booed, by the way. And, well, the show pretty much went off air with Sammy looking glassy-eyed at Jey's dead body. Meanwhile, Logan walked off while continuing to be admonished by the crowd. Did I ever mention how fucked up the character dynamics in this feud are? All because they insist on trying to force Logan Paul into this position as a babyface. I don't get it. I mean, it was never going to work from the jump, but they're just going to keep riding that gimp horse all the way to the finish line, aren't they? Kind of a flat finish to the show, if I'm being honest. Like I alluded to earlier on, the show started off super hot for the first several segments, and by the time we got to the Strowman Omos deal, everything was pretty much a downhill slope from there. It's not to say it was bad or anything, because I still enjoyed a lot of what I saw, but I almost would have advised them to maybe start the show with the Logan skid, get that out of the way as quickly as possible, and then cap off with the Sheamus injury angle. At least it would have been a more proper and fitting way to go out. And I know the Logan-Roman thing is only temporary. My guess is Roman's going to go over Logan in Saudi Arabia, and that'll pretty much be the end of it. But this whole title program is just a total back-ass-words feud when it comes to the face-heel dynamic. Even the WWE fans are not buying Logan Paul as a babyface. And those fans will normally cheer and boo the right people on any occasion. Not Logan Paul, man. Even with him being paired with Roman Reigns, the ultimate heat magnet, they're still not buying Logan Paul as a babyface. Amazing. But in the interim, the Bray Wyatt stuff continues to leave me intrigued. Rey Mysterio is still having one of the best runs we've seen him have in a long time. I dig everything they're doing with the Bloodline as a group. Everything's not perfect with this show, but I'm able to extract the good parts when I find them. That's always a good sign. This is not a boring show. Once upon a time, I probably would have made the case that Raw and SmackDown were nothing but that. Boring, nothing happening TV shows that droned on and on for an eternity. But under this new regime, there's some good stuff happening right now. It's not the greatest show in the world, but it's far from the worst. Hopefully that was also far from our worst podcast we've done. I honestly feel like I've been talking for hours about seemingly nothing. I guess there was a decent amount going on with SmackDown this week, but yeah, that Retro Raw show was one of those cases where I was just struggling to come up with anything to either write down or talk about. Guess that's what happens when you book Kevin Nash in the main event segment. Not a good sign, as we'd come to find out a couple years later. Anyhow, thanks for stopping into the show. Make sure you come back this Friday for the Dynamite Report, as well as whatever comes up with world-class wrestling and the Saturday night Superstation programming. Got a lot of 30-minute programs that are going to be flying by, and they do fly by very quickly. Pretty much all the retro content flies by, though. Probably because they're actually very entertaining programs with stuff that I can actually invest in. Whereas with modern wrestling, unless it's MJF or the Bloodline, I'm usually twiddling my thumbs waiting for something interesting to happen. But with AEW getting back to regularly scheduled programming this week, hopefully it'll be better than that shit sandwich they offered up this past week. We will see, though. Until then, take care, all. Peace.